What's up, everyone? I wanted to dive into a topic I think is extremely important and helps us understand other people and where other fields in science and how those people from those fields think about performance outcomes and how everything is interrelated. So it's all hinging upon a concept which is called explained variance. So I'll just put that up in the corner here. Explained variance is the idea that, or we'll even actually call explained percentage, that one topic might explain a certain percentage of a given entity or thing. For example, let's say if we're looking at performance outcomes and we want to look at, say, in the pure form, physiology, this can explain, say, 10% of what we see in that performance outcome, right? If you just look at the physiology of the person, it explains 10%. If we look at biomechanics, all right, maybe that explains, 7%. We look at genetics, and again, some of these are pretty kind of interconnected because you could say, well, genetics dictates physiology, whatever. Just for the example, please bear with me. Explains 5%. You could say nutritional history, nutrition as a whole, explains 6%, so on and so forth. You could keep adding different fields in psychology, 8% or 12%, whatever. But the idea is each one of these fields helps explain a given outcome. So if I am person A and I came from physiology, right, we'll have better A. And person B came from biomechanics, and C from genetics, and D from nutrition. And we have, E from, put one more field in here, we'll say neuroscience, because I want to put neuroscience in here, neurology. So we have all these different fields, and we'll give neurology a percentage here, say 6%. And we have 5 different people from 5 different fields, A, B, C, D, and E, all different people. Now what happens if this person A is only from physiology, they might think their 10% is the only percent that goes into this outcome. So they say, hey, look, I'm right. And person B goes, well, I can actually explain some of this. I'm right. And C does the same. And, this is the worst D over here. D does the same. And E does the same. They all think they're right because their own area can help explain a certain percentage of an outcome, right? So this is explained percentage or explained variance, right? What amount what amount of variability of the outcome can your area explain? So what happens, we all think, either from different areas, that we understand why something's happening based on what we know. And so this is where things get really tricky and how science can get kind of confusing, because science, in order to understand the percentage of explained variance, say like I want to understand about physiology, we have to work in semi-isolated and isolated studies. So we say, look, this study looks at this, this, and this, and there's significance between these groups. Therefore, the muscle mass is an indicator of how well you play baseball or whatever the heck it might be. So it explains some of it, but not all of it. Now, the same thing happens in all the other areas, right? In biomechanics, we have an isolated study and so on and so forth. And we say, look, it explains, and so therefore performance outcomes are for this. And it goes on and on and on in a circular fashion between all the different areas. But what happens is we as consumers probably come from a path and we say, I'm from a nutrition background. So everything I look at is biased towards nutrition. And that's fine. But as true integrative, human performance experts, we want to understand what percent variance are in these other areas, right? And how can I, as a nutrition background, understand neurology and genetics in a way that allow me to greater explain the performance outcomes? So this is why we see so much division and so much confusion and so much angst in our field, is because everyone is kind of right and everyone is also kind of wrong. Everyone, for the most part, depending on what science you feel, what field of science you come from, can probably explain some portion of performance outcome. And why is that the case? Why can all these fields explain that? Because all of these fields have one thing in common. They're in the human body. Oh my goodness, look. No wonder why they all are kind of right, because they're all studying the human body, and the human body is the thing that is driving the performance outcome. So we're not in fields that are against each other. We're actually in united fields, integrated fields that are working to kind of solve the same problem. And it's universal across different areas that have to study a complex system. This is the same thing that applies to if you're looking at market analysis and the economy. Well, you can look at microeconomics and sociology and psychology, and you could also look at macroeconomics of supply and demand. And then you could say, well, we explain this but based on this macro model, and we explain this based on the micro model, but really they're all studying the economy as a whole, so they all play a role. In the same way, we are all studying the human body. Where human body is what we're trying to understand. The human body is what drives this performance outcome. It is what it is the thing doing the performance. And so, of course, all these different fields of the human, of science that study the human body are going to help explain some percentage of it. Now, that's really cool because science allows us to identify what fields might have larger explained variance for a certain thing, an outcome, than other. But at the end of the day, they are interconnected with each other. So it's foolish to think that one is better than the other, when ultimately all we are trying to do as performance coaches is understand the stinking thing that is the human body. We're trying to understand this guy right here so we can make the best decisions for our athletes, for whoever we're working with. And so at the end of the day, we need to remember that the person that you might be talking to might come from one of these fields, right? Biomechanics, physiology, neuroscience, nutrition, genetics, and they might have their innate biases. But we also need to understand, because of that, no one's right and no one's wrong. And we have to understand the complexity at which we are dealing with many different parts of a complex system, and they're all integrated. So at the end of the day, hopefully this helps explain some of the confusion you might be seeing in different areas. And you might talk to one professor or one expert in one area and an expert in another area, and everyone thinks that their field is right, when really everyone's field is kind of right and kind of wrong, because at the end of the day, we're all studying the human body.